going to go ahead and walk through a possible solution, and we will kind of go from there. So the first thing, let me just kind of point out some of the high-level things that exist in an Angular application. So within our, not karma config, you notice here in index.html, we have this app tag with loading. So this will just, I've actually put like a spinner loader in here, but this will exist until Angular initializes. And then we have this bundle.js, so this is what Webpack is actually outputting. And so it's just taking everything and compiling it into a single file that the browser understands. From here, we have the boot file, which is importing Bootstrap, the router providers, and the app component. And we're bootstrapping app component with our router provider. So this allows us, it's an application-wide dependency that allows us to route from place to place. Within here, let me actually just go to experiments. We have an experiments component. We are defining experiments. And so this is where kind of TypeScript comes into play. I think code should be self-documenting, that when you write code, if you find that you need an excessive amount of comments, that's generally a smell that you are not being precise enough with what actually is happening with your code. So this is clean code, you know, Robert C. Martin stuff. Side note, I think every workshop I do, if you haven't read clean code, please go do so. All my worldviews on software comes from that. So if you want to be a better Angular developer, go read clean code. But here, for instance, I could go experiments and just initialize this to an empty array. So this is valid ES5, valid ES6, valid TypeScript. But, and I'm not initializing this at the moment because it gets initialized here. But now when I look at experiments, I can say, well, what is experiments? Is it a string? What is it? Well, now I can say, if it was just like this, I could say, oh, it's an array. But even better is I can say it's an array of the experiment object, whatever that is. Well, how would I know what that is? If I go to the, in common, I've created an interface for this. And sometimes I may or may not break this out into a file, but you can see here I'm defining an interface, and I'm saying an experiment object will have a name, description, and completed property. And so this is really handy for conveying intent of when I get this collection, it is an array of experiments, of the experiment object, and because I know what the interface is and I'm programming to it, I know what to expect. And so when you start to program to interfaces, things get really powerful because now you can have concrete objects that, because they adhere to an interface, you can swap those out at runtime. Or you might have 7 variations of it, but because they're all basically contracted to the same interface, it's really quite interesting. So let's go into the home component, and I'm going to add in a property. We'll just go greeting. I'm going to say this is a string, and holla at your boy. Okay? Then in our template, let's see if this will jump to this. And just go up here. Really wish I had that blink tag right now. Greeting, so classic interpolation. Let's just go and see if this actually worked. Boom, holla at your boy. So I've passed phase 1 of my own challenge. Imagine that. So we'll go back to here. And I'm going to do a super greeting.
Hey Scott, there's a TypeScript question in chat.
So you can mark classes private or methods private. It all gets stripped out at compile time, but by default, properties are public. And so here I'm just doing super greeting, setting it to a string. And then in here, this dot message equals dot state service. So if you'll notice here,
you want it to be greeting that message, right?
Oh, clever. Yes. You know, if I had front-end master t-shirts right now, I would give you one, because if I do something really stupid, just call me out. Like bringing up front-end master t-shirts, I guess. Mark, stop looking at me like that. So one thing that I do want to point out, that the idea of this happening in JavaScript, like ES5, is like never. Like, I just got used to programming without it. Oh, look at that, IntelliSense. That's handy. I appreciate that. I'll take it.
That should be a method, shouldn't it?
No, so I just defined it as a property. Let's see here. Oh, snap. I've just passed phase 2 of my own challenge. And you know what? I'm going to use this opportunity to do, how do I want to do this? You know what? I'll just create a new, actually, you know what? This is where the muscle memory stuff comes in. Actually, we'll do const config. I don't know why this is throwing this out. Tell you what, we'll just do this. Create a new interface file. I see your hand up.
Yeah, if you want to take an hour, or do you want to wait till you're done?
You can tell me now, and I may or may not answer it.
Okay, there's just a comment. The state service class, they see the property message has accessor methods get and set, and they're just wondering, is that the recommended practice?
It depends. I think generally not, especially once you move to a reactive kind of paradigm, like that pattern just becomes null and void. So I think I did that more so when I wrote that to show kind of private and how you may actually work with a private method or member. But generally, I find that incurring like that extra overhead with getters and setters, unless you're actually specifically doing something, then I generally will not do that. But again, it is handy if you need to say, when I set this, I need to validate or have some validation, or I need to do some transformation on this.
Yeah, and to add to that, the getters and setters are just, like you said, just used to override what you would normally do with property lookups and property setters. Yeah. So like, oh, I also want to do this in addition when this happens. So you can also just think of it as like a callback when this thing is set or get. So it's your chance to do something. So you don't have to use it, but you can.
Does that automatically work as well? So if you've set public get and set, will it expose a public property called message?
Yes.
So in the interface, you still have to define the individual methods and private properties for it to match.
Yeah, if you implement the interface, yeah.
Yeah. I fixed those errors by reinstalling.
Oh,
I think I was just behind the repo.
okay.
It's not liking me. You want to know why?
Because you haven't implemented the interface until.
I haven't implemented the interface. So you can see here, I created a config interface right here. I'm simply saying it has a name and a description. And then I import the interface, and I'm saying I have this config object here that's of the config type or interface. And this is one of the reasons why I like interfaces, is because now it's like this thing is not well formed. Like you actually haven't adhered to the interface. So I have a name property, but I'm missing description. And so then once I add this, then kind of that indication like, hey, something's not right here. You need to fix that. And then within my home component, I'm going to for config as well. And then I'm going to say that. And so now I can, again, type this and say when this thing comes in, it's going to be config. IntelliSense for the win. And then here's the pro tip. I find that a lot of times working with an application is you write some code, that takes 20% of your time, and you spend the other 80% of your time trying to figure out what in the world's going on. One of the things that I do a lot is if I'm trying to bind to something, a lot of times I'm making incorrect assumptions about the shape or the state of it. And so what I'll do is do a pre-tag. Then I'll go here, config, and this may be widely known news, but I run into a lot of people who haven't seen this. So if you haven't seen it, so pre-tag, config, and then you use the JSON pipe as it's known now. And if I did this without breaking something, wadata. So now you can actually dump this object.
Where's the fog machine?
I think Scott I'm glad he wasn't taking a drink of milk because it would have came out of his nose right then. So with your pre, and I think because we're using Bootstrap, we get kind of some extra styling there, but it allows you to jump or dump that object out into your template and examine it. Yes, sir.
Does the decorator always have to immediately precede the class for a component?
That's a good question. I've only ever put it on top.
What was the question?
Does the decorator need to immediately precede the component class?
Yes.
Yeah. Now you can have more than one decorator, and they'll stack on top of each other. So a lot of times you'll have like component, and then you'll have your routing in conjunction with that. But I believe that they have to be on top of the class.
Yeah, the proposal that Yehuda Katz made for decorators, it has to be that way. Otherwise, it won't mix in or it won't decorate it, because if it isn't, it won't know what class to do. It's looking for it because it's sitting on top of it. So yeah.
I mean, so a good example of that is if you had like, let's say, again, two classes in the same file, you could go here, but then now if you weren't enforcing that, and if you put this in between, now it becomes very ambiguous. Like, what am I decorating? Do I decorate this or decorate that? Yes, decorate them both, maybe? I don't know. So